The first place I often start is naming how the world isn't fit for them. So that really gets to be spoken because introverts often don't talk about it. Right? So they have this internal experience of the world feels too loud, too much. So really having conversations about what that feels like. And I always like to sprinkle in that conversation that many quiet people feel like this.
Hello, and welcome to the Quiet and Strong podcast, especially for introverts. I'm your host, David Hall, and the creator of quietandstrong.com. This is a weekly podcast dedicated to understanding the strengths and needs of introverts. Introversion is not something to fix, but to be embraced. Normally, we'll air each episode on a Monday. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite platform. Leave a review, tell a friend, help get the word out there. Tracy Guillet is an introverted therapist specializing in working with introverted teens and adults who struggle with anxiety in relationships. Until Tracy discovered she was introverted, she spent much of her life feeling like there was something wrong with her. She now understands her quiet nature and is able to bring this learning to her introverted clients. It brings Tracy so much joy to see her quiet people start to like who they are.
All right, hello, and I'm excited today to have our guest, Tracy Guillet. Tracy, welcome to the Quiet and Strong podcast.
Yeah, thanks, David. Really excited to be here.
Great. I first became aware of Tracy. I spoke at the Quietly Successful Summit about a couple years ago, and she spoke at the second one. She did a nice presentation on social anxiety, and I was very impressed with that. And ever since, we've been connected on LinkedIn, and I enjoy her Instagram posts. She puts out a lot of great content. And we're definitely going to get into social anxiety and anxiety. Tracy will talk a little bit more about that. But first, as always, I would like to hear about your journey, Tracy, and where you came from and how you came to embrace your introversion and now be a therapist for those introverts with anxiety and social anxiety.
Well, I think I was probably about age 40 when I came across introversion, and then the more that I read about it, could really identify with that. There was some relief in somebody explaining to me who I was, because for so long I felt out of place, different. How come I can't be like other people? So then as I learned more about it, was able to embrace it, and then learn things that work best for me, what don't work best for me. And as I was noticing that about myself, my quietness, I was still doing agency work, providing therapy for people. So then with my quieter clients, I started to pull that in with helping them see why they might be struggling in a certain way, that they were fine at home with their partner, but when their partner wanted to go out with friends, they'd be at the restaurant overwhelmed. How come they're like that? So really being able to introduce, as a quiet person, that can be a lot to do. It's not that we can't do those things, but it just takes a lot of energy. And then as I was pulling that in with my clients, could see them relax, them get to know themselves better. They started to change how they viewed themselves. And it was kind of this really nice reciprocal back and forth, because as I saw it being helpful to them, I could also essentially offer that to myself too, that this is just what I need. It's not a deficit, any of that. And then with my kids, I have 3 kids. 2 are more introverted, 1 more extroverted. So again, being able to see almost like how the world interacts with their different personalities, the judgment that can come with that, and then how to support them through that as well. And and so now I see introversion as a fact, not as better, worse, and then just how that's changed my life in such a positive way. I think it was about 5 years ago, I decided to go into private practice. And then about 3 years ago, I changed, because then I saw that I really liked working with quieter people, and they were the clients that would tend to stay with me longer. So that's when I decided to specialize in that, helping quiet teens, quiet adults with anxiety, social anxiety, relationship issues, work issues, and have this really lovely practice now where I get to sit with my favorite people, talk about my favorite things, and help them change the story of who they are so they get to that place of creating the life that they want. So a hard journey at first, but it's ending up in a really great place.
That's amazing. Yeah, we have in common that we have 3 kids. I have 2 extroverts and 1 introvert with an introverted wife. So, and that was one of the big epiphanies for me about how it's so natural for us. Because, we raised our kids the same, and they came with their own personalities for sure. And so, again, it was something to embrace. So, what were some key things that helped you realize, hey, I'm an introvert, and this is who I am. Gifts come with what were some catalysts for that to help you see who you were?
Yeah, the one thing, so after I had my first child and I had joined a baby and mom class, and and whenever I had joined a group in the past, I always had this assumption that I'm going to quickly make friends, I'm going to find my peer group. But that had never actually been my experience, right? Because I show up in groups, I'm more of an observer. So it was in this group that I realized that once I was ready to join, so I had observed enough, I knew who I wanted to connect with. People had already connected and likely made the assumption I didn't want to be part of it. So that helped me. And so in the past, I assumed that meant they didn't like me, I wasn't likable. Where with this group, I was able to see, it's like, oh, because I held back, they think I don't want to be part of it. It's not actually about who I am. So that helped me change that. I can still express interest in joining people. I don't have to stay quiet. So then as I kind of challenged myself to do things like to put myself out there a bit more, connect with people, like that helped me change how I saw myself. But then it also helped me see that looking for connections in a larger group setting might not be the best place for me to connect with people, even though I can do it. So I learned that I'm going to connect better in one-on-one situations with people. So yes, I'm not sure if that answered your question, but kind of how I gained some
Yeah,
insight.
no, that's great. But how did you learn about the word introvert and then say, yes, this is who I am?
I think, yeah, I was in university. I was just in the bookstore just browsing and I came across the book and it might have been The Introvert Advantage. So I'm not sure exactly what compelled me to pull the book off the shelf. But as I was flipping through the chapters, I'm like, this is who I am. So it was really through a book. And then
Yeah.
Susan Cain's TED Talk, I think that was kind of the next big thing that I saw. And in that TED Talk, she does such a lovely job of normalizing introversion. And I can, reading being a fantastic pastime, I can definitely relate to that. So I think it's like probably those 2 pieces that really helped me land that this is who I am, and sort of that process that there are so many good things about who I am.
Yeah, very nice. And I also read The Introvert Advantage. Remind me the author's name? Marty
Uh,
Olson Laney? Is that?
yes.
Okay. So
That's,
that's
yeah.
a great book. And of course, Susan Cain's Quiet and her TED Talk have been instrumental for so many of us. So yeah, and the story you tell, it's my story. It's like we felt like something was wrong with us. So many guests, so many authors I hear from, that's the story. And of course, that's why we're doing what we're doing, right, Tracy? We're talking because we want people to discover earlier, and you work with teens, and that's amazing. Discover earlier. Hey, you have some natural gifts and abilities. They're normal. They're you can really succeed if you understand them. You're not going to change them, but you can really succeed if you understand them.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to say it, that you'll succeed when you understand who you are.
Yeah, and I tried plenty to be something I wasn't, and that didn't work out so well.
No, it exhausts us, drains us, and makes us feel bad about
Yeah.
ourselves.
So on this podcast, it's definitely, um, embracing introverted strengths, honoring introverted needs, uh, coming up with some strategies for success, and then we also bust myths. Is there a myth or two that you want to bust today about introversion?
Yeah, I would say like quietness is not concerning. Like it really, like there's nothing pathological about it. There's no intervention needed. That quietness is really healthy and normal. So, because I think in our society, we can get quite worked up about, quiet kids, quiet teens, quiet adults. They need to talk more. And there's actually no problem with quietness.
Absolutely. And I'll say that a big piece of being for success as an introvert is preparing, and a lot of that's preparing in the quiet. I have really been looking forward to our chat this morning, but guess what? Right before it, I made sure I had some quiet just to get my thoughts together and, think about, you know, what do I want to talk about today? And, I have my notebook next to me, and that quiet was so helpful. And it's a normal part of who I am as an introvert, but it's also a gift. Um, so you mostly work with teens, adults, parents of teens on anxiety and social anxiety. What would you say? What would you say is how are when it comes to anxiety or social anxiety, and maybe I guess maybe let's talk about that first. Like what's the difference between the two?
Right? The difference between anxiety and social anxiety.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, and just in a really general way. So like it'll sound really obvious. Social anxiety is when we feel really anxious about being social. So a lot of the kids I work with, they'll have performance anxiety, right? So did I study enough? Will I do well on the test? Even when they're writing the test, they can be overwhelmed. So the anxiety would be there. Did I prepare enough? Where social anxiety, it can show up when they imagine being with, like, what if this goes wrong today at school? What if, am I wearing the right thing? What will the kids think of me? Or when they're at school, they'll do so much censoring of what they say. It's like they can almost like they're holding two conversations at the same time. So as I'm talking to you, I'm trying to be present and say the right things, but I'm also having a conversation with myself. Should I say this? Should I say that? So they're really censoring themselves, what trying so hard not to say the wrong thing, not to make a fool of themselves. They don't want to make the other person feel bad. So in that social anxiety, they're holding so much stress about that social interaction. And then they go home, and then as they try to get to sleep at night, if they feel like that interaction didn't go well, they replay it 1,000 times. Okay? So then it like that overthinking that shows up with the social anxiety, and ends up being quite exhausting for them.
yeah, absolutely. And so definitely it's not limited to introverts. Extroverts can have plenty of anxiety or social anxiety. But what's the difference? Like, what's the difference working with an introverted client on their anxiety versus an extroverted client?
I think it's really I find like quieter people, we tend to feel more like we really don't want to make mistakes. We can't we can't let things go easy. So I think a more extroverted person, they'll definitely feel anxious in the moment, but a day later, they're not replaying that anxious moment over and over again. That they might, because they have tend to have more interactions, they might have more moments where they get anxious, but that they don't hold on to it nearly as long. And I do find with my clients that when things don't, or at least when they assume things didn't go well in a certain interaction, what does that mean about me? So, and because we spend so much time thinking, like our introverted brain loves to think,
Yes.
um, so we can help it think about positive things, or it'll think about negative things. So because their thinking often doesn't get interrupted, and that they're not sharing very much with what they're worried about, is it just creates more space to feed that anxiety, where the extroverted person is more likely to tell a friend, tell a parent, tell a sibling about, like, oh man, I can't believe I said this thing. Where the introverted person will do that all internally, which really unfortunately feeds the anxiety to keep going.
Yeah, and I think that's the big difference is because that's what introversion is to me is we're spending more time in our heads. and that's where the thoughts can go wrong, because we're spending that time. And I think you put it a really good way, where the extrovert is more outwardly focused and they're not spending as much time dwelling on things. So I think that could be a big difference in helping the introvert. What are some strategies that you use to? I guess there's two parts to this. Let's first talk about just introversion in general. What are some strategies you use to help people embrace their introversion and who they are?
Yeah, I find the first place I often start is naming how the world isn't fit for them. So that really gets to be spoken, because introverts often don't talk about it. Right? So they have this internal experience of the world feels too loud, too much. So really having conversations about what that feels like. And I always like to sprinkle in that conversation that many quiet people feel like this, right? To help break up that isolation, that there's nobody else like me kind of feeling. Um, and then I'll talk about the expert ideal. Susan Cain does a great job of talking about that in her book. So when we're always told we should be this kind of person and we're not, how that makes us feel bad versus there's something wrong with us. So try to really kind of pull apart the nuances of that. And because my clients, they're really good at being reflective, that stuff can land well. They can go deep with that, and then they start to see evidence in their own life of that. I love when one of my teens comes back and they tell me about something a teacher did, and essentially how the teacher tried to make them be more extroverted, where they can now have some context to understand why the teacher does that. And the teacher can have really great intentions, right? Because some teachers think the more they talk, then that means they're learning, where it doesn't mean that. So as these kids learn about why they're expected to talk more, to show up more, and because they're introverted, that actually doesn't fit for them, it helps them change the story of themselves. So that's generally where I start with them around this.
Yeah, so reflection. It can be our superpower. It can be our downfall too. And so it's really switching that. And so if you can help someone use that power to understand themselves, that can make all the difference. Whereas if we're thinking all those negative thoughts, that could really cause problems. But as introverts, we're gifted thinkers, and if we can use that to get to know ourselves and get to thinking about how we can get what we want, I think that's a big key. So I think reflection is a superpower. You mentioned that being quiet was important. What are another one or two superpowers that you think come from introversion? And we're all different. There's a lot of different ones out there. We all have different things, but what are a couple of the main ones that you see?
Yeah, I think the obvious one is that we're good listeners.
Yeah.
But I think also, and I would say for myself and other introverted people I know, is that we can be quite good at hearing what people aren't saying. And then if we name what isn't being spoken, how helpful that is. And I think we also can see the gaps. So that often shows up in the workplace, not necessarily with teens yet, but in the workplace, we might see that this service is missing, or if we did this a bit differently, the impact it could make. So sometimes we see things that other people aren't seeing. Sometimes it takes the bravery to say it, right? If nobody else is speaking about this thing, but I can just so obviously see it. So I think those are some of our superpowers that we have to offer, our work environment, our family, our friends.
Yeah, definitely. We can be great listeners. I will say it's important that people don't perceive us as listeners just because they may be doing all the talking. Conversations need to go both ways. Yeah, we can be masters of observation for sure. Yeah, that's good. So what are some strategies you use to help people manage or overcome their anxiety?
The main strategy, and it's not like it's more like a long-term maintenance kind of strategy, but it really, we need good relationships. anxiety, it almost like feeds on isolation, right? So the more disconnected we feel, we tend to be more anxious. So how to start building up better relationships? For some introverted people, they actually can have really good relationships, but they don't access the relationship. So, and just as you were saying, like they can be the good listener, but they're not talking to their friends, right? That they're not sharing their insights, they're not sharing what they're struggling with. So, so that's some of the work that I'll do. Like, what stops you from opening up to your friend? You know, what stops you from telling a parent, you know, that you're overwhelmed? Right. So when they understand what's stopping them first, right? I don't want to burden people. You know, my mom looks too stressed. My friend's already dealing with things, and to help them see in a relationship, connection needs to happen both ways, right? That if we don't share enough, people struggle to be connected with us. So to help them see opening up more is what's going to be helpful. So then once they have a better idea of how they're showing up in the relationships, why they're doing that, and then like the strategy, kind of the active piece of the strategy is what to do differently. And a big piece is practicing. Like, our brain likes to do things exactly the same way, right? So if I show up in a friendship group and I show up as the listener, I'll just keep doing that unless I'm really intentional about doing something different, right? So what's that the next easiest thing that somebody can do? With some of my teen clients, like sometimes they just need the practice of talking in front of other people. So it can be ordering food at a restaurant, you have a fast food place, right? So their parent, the parent and the teen have the plan that when they go into the restaurant, the teen's going to order. The parent's not going to rescue them, right? When the parent sees how anxious they are. So they get that practice of speaking out loud and then noticing they managed it, right? I think that's the next piece that is when we're anxious and to notice that we survived it. And I know that might sound a bit dramatic, but when it comes to anxiety, our brain can be like, this is life and death situation. Right? So we kind of help the brain calm down to say, I actually did it and I'm okay.
And is part of that also just being reflective, like this shouldn't cause me anxiety. It's normal to be able to do. I mean, is that part of it? Just asking yourself what was causing the anxiety?
Yeah, and I think it's really important to name, because that's one of the things that I have a worksheet that I'll use with my clients. Like, I'm feeling anxious because, you know, and that list can be quite long, but it's more kind of in the moment, right? I'm anxious because this is what will help my anxiety calm down. So talking to a friend, you know, texting my mom or texting a friend kind of things. I do think it's important. I think one of the hard things around anxiety is not to judge ourselves. So some of us come into the world more anxious. So we just actually will be anxious. But it's more about how do I manage the anxiety? Because it's really important that anxiety is not the decision maker. Right. So if I listen to my anxiety, you and I wouldn't be talking today. Right. Because I'd be like, no, that's too much. I can't do it.
Yeah. Right.
So yeah, to just, you know, I'm having anxiety and I don't have, but I have a choice to listen to it or not.
Right. But I mean, if you are able to change your thoughts, you know, you do the thing like you're saying, but you're able to change your thoughts, then that could help you to have less or maybe not even anxiety the next time you're doing that thing. Is that how you see it?
Completely. Yeah. Because it's, and I'm sure you've heard the language about like stretching our or going outside of our comfort zone or stretching ourselves a bit.
Yeah.
Because then as we stretch ourselves a bit, then we actually create a new comfort zone.
Yes.
So then those things become easier.
Yes. And that's what I say. I say it's not getting out. I say it's stretching like you did or expanding. Because if I just get out of my comfort zone and I don't challenge my thoughts, and then I do that thing, you know, you use the example of ordering food. If that's causing me anxiety and I do it, but then I don't change my thoughts about it, I'm going to be anxious the next time. And so it's really stretching or expanding your comfort zone. So I say change your comfort zone so that you know, because like, yeah, there was definitely a time in the past where I would have never been comfortable doing this, but I love it. And it was a series of changing my thoughts about how I showed up in the world and things like that. So yeah, I love that, stretching your comfort zone or changing it, expanding it. But just to get out of it for me is not enough, because I don't, otherwise you're just going to keep being nervous or scared or anxious the next time if you don't. And it's not perfect, as you said it's a long process. Maybe it's reducing it, and then the next time it's reducing it more, kind of thing.
Completely. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's a good point you made too. If we do the things that cause anxiety, but don't change our thinking, then we'll continue to be anxious about those things, because
Yeah,
our thinking's so powerful,
yeah,
positive and
absolutely.
negative.
You work with both teenagers and adults, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. What's the difference with working with teenagers or adults?
I think that it's interesting because there's actually not a big difference and especially once they get to the teen years, like an introverted teen's not much different than an introverted, young teen or it's a young adult or middle-aged adult. Their phase of life is different, right? So, but internally, a lot of it's the same. The main difference I find, if I work with a 13-year-old compared to a 20-year-old, the work is actually quicker with a 13-year-old, even though we're dealing with the same issues. But the 13-year-old has much less experience of feeling bad about themselves. Right? So by the time they're 20 and they show up in counseling, it's now they've had junior high and high school, which are often not a very kind place for more introverted people. So the message so many times that there's something wrong with you has been reinforced. So that's the difference I find, is that there's actually more recovery that needs to happen the older they are.
Okay.
But in terms of who they are is quite similar.
Okay. Yeah, that "why are you so quiet?" I just want to banish that from everybody's vocabulary. That can be very damaging.
Completely. Yeah. And I think for the quiet person, my own experience was I actually didn't know the answer to that. I'm like, I don't know why I'm so quiet. And especially if it's a teacher or an adult asking, it's like, it would be really helpful if you knew the answer and could tell me why I'm so quiet instead of asking me. Because as soon as you ask me, I'm so overwhelmed anyways.
Yeah, you have no place, as if you're as a quiet person, you have nowhere to come back from that. And it just kind of can make you feel more, it just kind of can be a vicious cycle and make you feel more quiet. So
Mhm.
how do parents help the anxious teen? Like, what do they need to know?
And I would say having a really good understanding of introversion, and probably at this point, most of us have that basic understanding that um, we get more drained with people. We need to move away from people to recharge. But what's the actual lived experience of an introverted person in this world that really emphasizes extroversion? So for the parents to have a much deeper understanding of what that means for their kids, kind of like day to day, what some of these kids are having to manage. And I think it'd be good for the parents to check in, and I don't mean this in a judgmental way, but what biases might they have about having a quiet kid? Because sometimes parents really struggle with that. Like, I just need them to talk more, to be out there more, because then that makes me think that I'm a good parent. Right. So just to have some awareness of, are they holding any of that? And I know, like, even when I started learning about introversion, I was aware that I held those beliefs for my kids. When I was told when my kids started school, they needed to talk more, I really tried to help them talk more. Right. So as I learned more, I'm like, oh, that is not the solution at all. But so for parents to be aware of their own thoughts and feelings about that, and then how to support their kids through that. So I think like really having conversations about, generally about, quiet, like extroverted people, introverted people, the differences, how the parent can see the introverted qualities in their kids, what they love about that. And sometimes I like to name with my kids too. Sometimes I can be irritated with my introversion, right? If I, like when I, not that we're doing much planning right now with COVID, but sometimes when I want to do take that other invite, and I'm like, I can't though, I need the downtime. So sometimes I get irritated by it. And that's just part of it, right? Just like I'm sure an extroverted person can get irritated if they don't get enough invites and they're bored. And if the parent is anxious themselves, because usually if there's an anxious teen, there's an anxious parent. If the parent starts to talk about their anxiety just in that more conversational way, we all of us will experience anxiety to some degree, just to normalize those conversations. And I do that with my kids. Like I'll name my anxiety, and still like really appropriate ways to share with my kids. And then I find that they'll kind of spontaneously share with me why they're anxious. And when we can talk about anxiety in a really, almost like it's like really just to normalize it, that really takes some of the power out of anxiety. So those are some of the things that I suggest parents can do.
Yeah, you mentioned something that made me think. 'Cause so like, we talked about Susan Cain and the extroverted ideal. Yeah, parents could be putting that on their kids. It's like you should be like this. And even introverted parents might do that to their kids. And so yeah, we need to continue to get the word out that we all have strengths. We need introverts and extroverts, and it's all good. Um, you also were talking about earlier about relationships and the importance. What myths do you think are out there around relationships and introversion, and what's really the truth as you see it?
I think, like again, going back to the extrovert ideal, is that like we need a lot of friends. Um, when we do things that we enjoy, we should do those things with other people. Um, and then, and I think extroverts, they connect because like they need more connection. Introverts, we need less connection, but those connections need to be deeper connections. So so for teens, if they're seeing their friend once every 2 weeks, like outside of school, that can be a really satisfying friendship for them, right? And especially if it's a good friendship, where that might look concerning, right? Like, it's the weekend, how come you're not going out this weekend, right? So if an introverted person, when we feel connected to our friends, we don't have to see them every day, we don't have to talk to them every day, right? Because we can really feel the connection, and then when we see them or do talk to them, it still feels good. So like the amount that we connect with our friends is different than for extroverts, and it's not alarming, it's just different.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. Different. But we need relationships, because there's definitely myths out there that you know I especially with the pandemic, I hear, oh yeah, you introverts, you're all loving this, and but I definitely went through periods of isolation, you know and I'll say, and if people probably heard me say on this show, I have my wife and 3 kids, and definitely for the first year we were mostly the only people we saw, and I love them and I wouldn't rather spend any time with anybody else. But there were other people that I really felt isolated from, other family and friends, where I didn't see them as much as I wanted to. And so, relationships are very important to us. But you hit it. It's like we just need deeper connections, but we need connections. And it's common for us to have fewer but deeper connections, and that's really important.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah, and all of us, just as you said, have been impacted by the pandemic. Um, yeah, and I think especially all of the teens in different ways, um, introverted and extroverted, right? Yeah, because it's hard to connect with people when we're actually not allowed to see each other, and so
Yeah. Yeah, I think we've definitely learned a lot, having to step back, but we do all need relationships. That's for sure. Maybe there's someone out there that doesn't. I don't know that person, and I'm not bashing that person, what but for the most part, we all need connection as human beings, for sure.
yeah, 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 we're wired for connection, right?
Yeah.
And it's just some of us need less of it, but we still need good
Yeah,
connection.
yeah. Okay. You're doing some great work around introversion and anxiety and social anxiety. Is there anything else that you want to talk about that we haven't talked about yet?
Um, yeah, I think, and maybe it's more of a repeat, but quiet teens, quiet adults. And I think it's really what you were saying earlier too, when we understand ourselves, we really can create these great lives. And that can be just as satisfying as a more extroverted person. The one area that I can see my clients struggle in, and it's actually especially the young men, is that they at some point, probably in their teen years, they've disconnected from what they want because it doesn't match for what they're told, especially what males are supposed to be like, who they should be. So they kind of disconnect from what they want, and then they don't know what to go to school for, or they're going to school for something that they don't actually want to do. So, and my point with that is why it's so important that we allow introverted people to embrace who they are and not make it an issue. Now, if anxiety shows up, if they don't have friends, if they have a hard time talking to anybody, that's a time to be concerned and to look for help. But if they're happy, quiet people, to really embrace that and love them for who they are.
Absolutely. And I think that's the key. Again, it comes back to this ideal that sometimes society has out there that we buy into. And it's like, what do you want? What's going to make you happy? And how do you get there? And I think a lot of that just comes from understanding yourself and your strengths. We have a lot of great strengths. Everybody does. And what your needs are. I know I need a balance. I like we talked about, I need some quiet in my day. That's part of my success strategies as an introvert. And I need that quiet for a lot of different reasons, to plan, to think, to dream, but also just to recharge sometimes. And that's not going to be the same for my extroverted friends, but that's okay. They may need something different, but I need to know what I need, and that helps introverts get what they want. It's what do you need, and what do you want?
Yeah, and to work to let go of the judgment that might show up when
Yeah,
what I want is to go on a hike all by myself. It's like, then
yeah.
do that.
And some people might think that's really strange. Why would you want to go on a hike by yourself? But somebody that's hiking by themselves, it might just be such a great time to clear your head, to think about things, to do so many different things. It might, that might be so recharging and energizing for you. And then sometimes the same person might want to go on a hike with friends or their kids, and it's just, it's going to be different. But yeah, there's nothing wrong with, in fact, some people would really enjoy that time, and we need to just normalize what's good for us.
Completely, yeah. And then when we can really let ourselves enjoy that, um, it's a life changer.
Yeah, it's funny. I before the pandemic, I did, I like to travel, but I also, before the pandemic, took a lot of the staycations where I took time off of work and just, stayed home and did some things at home. And for some people, they're like, oh, that's weird, But to me, sometimes that was the most relaxing vacation ever. And since the pandemic, I definitely have done a lot more than that, In the beginning, we took a lot of day trips where we might get out into nature, but there was plenty of time where I just took some time off work. And again, somebody might think that's strange, but it's been something that's good for me to kind of mix it up with going places, but also taking some time off just to relax.
Completely, yeah. There's this walk that I like to do, and sometimes I'll go with my friend. And one day I told her, it was after I gone on my own, and she's like, oh, well, you could have called me. It was like she was a bit concerned that I did this walk on my own. It's like, that was by choice. Thank you,
Yeah.
but I like
Yeah.
my
And
own
also,
company.
yeah, actually, yeah. And also, somebody might be offended, they're your friend, and why didn't you invite them? But it's like sometimes you might want to have some company and sometimes you don't. And it's all good.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point, that sometimes our need for time on our own can offend people, even though that's not our intention at all.
Yeah. And so that's a big part of this too, is just being able to articulate that need to others. And hey, you know what? This is something normal for me. Um, and it's helping me to be a better person. It's helping me to be better in my relationships if I have this little bit of time.
Completely, yeah.
So I know you're working on a course. Tell everybody about what's coming up.
Yeah, so my plan is in March to have a course for parents of introverted teens because I find that there's not great information out there for these parents. So these parents, like, they want to help, they want to be supportive. And when we're not confident in our parenting, that doesn't feel good. And not that, and I think because our kids are always changing, we can't always be confident in our parenting, but to have that place of being more grounded. So I'm going to offer a course to parents that goes deeper into understanding these kids, what junior, like that internal experience of junior high school is for them, how they might judge themselves, shut themselves down, limit themselves. So, and because these kids, I think that's one of the gifts I find come from my work is that, like, I'm hearing from the teens what they might not be sharing with their parents, like those internal struggles. So in that general way, to help parents understand this is what happens for these kids, and then these are some ways to help them. And then and also the kids that have the most success that I work with are when parents actually start to do things differently as well. Because definitely I'll encourage the kids, different strategies to try. But then when parents start showing up differently with their team, that's kind of where the magic happens. Right. And especially when the teen sees that, oh, like the mom's doing things differently too. Mom's talking about her anxiety. Mom's not demanding me to do things as much because she's hearing that doesn't work for me. It just can this wonderful shift in that parent-teen relationship. So wanting to be able to offer that to parents so then they can do the work with their teens. So so it can just make such a positive difference
Very
for the
nice.
family unit.
Yeah, parenting. I think I heard a quote once that it's the most rewarding thing, but also the most challenging thing. And kids are so different, and it sounds wonderful. So we will look forward to your course. How will that be offered?
The best, so it'll be an online live course because I find
Okay.
that they work better. And the best way, because I don't have anything actually set up yet for people to sign up for it. But if people go to my website and sign up to receive my newsletter, that's the way that I'll be communicating most about it. So so people who are interested, if they sign up for my newsletter, they'll get information about it.
Okay. What is your website? And I'll also put it in the show notes.
It's quietpathways.com.
Very nice. And again, you can go there. Tracy has a great website. Like I said, I follow her on LinkedIn and Instagram, and she puts out some great content on a very regular basis. And so thank you, Tracy. It's been so great to have you on the show, and you're doing some amazing work around introversion and also anxiety.
Yeah, thanks, David. Yeah, and thanks for inviting me on because I love talking about this, and especially with people
Yeah,
that get it. So,
absolutely. It's been a great conversation. Thank you.
you're welcome.
Thank you so much for joining me today. I look forward to further connecting with you. Reach out at david@quietandstrong.com. Check out the website, quietandstrong.com. I'll add social media channels for me and my guests to the show notes. Please comment on social media posts. Send me topics or guests you'd like to see on the show. There's so many great things about being an introvert, and so we need those to be understood. Get to know your introverted strengths and needs and be strong.